The Harlem Renaissance happened during the early 20th century. It took place during a period of American history that featured much upheaval in all sectors of society. It was the first time that African Americans would be able to broadcast their unique voice on a national and even global level. It was a movement that would go on to produce some of America's greatest artists and writers of all time. The cultural flourishing of the Harlem Renaissance, while being a renewal of the American dream, served as its first true manifestation for many African Americans.
Bring me all of your dreams, you dreamers. Bring me all of your heart melodies, that I may wrap them in a blue cloud cloth, away from the too rough fingers of the world. And that is what poetry may do. Wrap up your dreams, protect and preserve them, and hold them until maybe they come true. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field, frozen with snow.
The Harlem Renaissance featured the onset of a new type of African American writer, one who would be recognized on the national level. Langston Hughes was one of many, and probably at the forefront of this movement in that he created poems that spoke to the internal struggle of many African Americans, an ideal that began with the 14th Amendment. Langston Hughes, in the poem Dreams, speaks about a dream that has often eluded African Americans, but that is still wanted and in the hearts of many. For the Reconstruction period and the end of slavery to represent an initial birth of the American dream is a horrible overstatement, according to W.E.B. Du Bois, who described the American dream as to plow and nail and dig for a poverty-stricken horde could only result in making him a poor craftsman. Therefore, the Harlem Renaissance was instead approaching the top of the stairs to equality, after a long, strenuous climb from slavery. The art and culture of the time was seen by both W.E.B. Du Bois and Alain Locke as a means of social uplift, to advance presentation of the Negro as civilized, cultured, and capable of making a worthwhile contribution to American society. As Langston Hughes described the elusive American dream through poetry, and Du Bois insisted that the dream had never existed, authors like Zora Neale Hurston, in novels like Their Eyes Were Watching God, described the plight of African Americans in the wake of slavery. These novels used literature as a medium to transmit their message of struggle. Literature became a message, a way for African Americans to broadcast their unique struggle and their unique plight in a free country to the rest of the country and the world.
Up until the early 1900s, African Americans did have a role in music. African Americans did create songs. However, it was the song that sold the record, not the artist. When slavery existed, slaves sang to one another, but not publicly. It was not till the Harlem Renaissance African Americans were recognized for their talents in the arts. The themes of the music shifted from misrepresented stereotypes to a proper depiction of African descent. The new African American dream was not simply about equality in social standing, but also equality in the pursuit of upward mobility. Duke Ellington was one of the most important African American composers of this time. The song that played in the introduction was the first part of his work, Black, Brown, and Beige. Black starts out discussing the hardships and depicts the life of Southern slaves. He had a famous house band that played in Harlem's Cotton Club. Lastly, the session Beige celebrates the Harlem Renaissance and African American pride. Duke Ellington, as well as other prominent artists at this time, such as Louis Armstrong, focused not only on the African American identity, but also unity with the American culture.
The dance that erupted during the Harlem Renaissance was originally almost strictly part of African American culture. As it changed and became more involved with society, the movements of the dances could be interpreted as being representative of the new freedom of opportunity and choice of African Americans. This time period was the first time that African Americans were able to pursue what was viewed as the American dream. Josephine Baker exemplified this discovered American dream when she dropped out of school at the age of only 13 in order to pursue her dream of performing. As a dancer, she incorporated traditional African dances into her routines in addition to modern ones. She would go on to become a very famous dancer and one of the iconic dancers of the Harlem Renaissance. Another famous dancer from the Harlem Renaissance was Bill Robinson. Bill Robinson would go on to become a very famous tap dancer and would later serve an iconic role in Hollywood. The African American dream has always been present in America. Originally, it always served behind the scenes. These new dancers and new musicians served as a way for the American dream to renew itself, and for it to be the first time that the American dream became truly available for African Americans to pursue.
Film and theater during the Harlem Renaissance gave the African Americans a new vehicle for their culture, but this vehicle did have its own limitations, thus limiting their ability to completely realize the American dream. The Harlem Renaissance was the first time that African Americans were able to be in films and theaters, but these institutions were not racially equal. This is exemplified with salaries, where white actors such as Charlie Chaplin made approximately $600,000 a year, and black actors such as Spencer Williams made approximately $150,000 a year. Furthermore, even when there were African Americans in films and theater, their characters were portrayed as being poor or goofy and were always ridiculed within the production. This idea is extremely evident in minstrel shows, which use blackface in order to portray the African Americans. Additionally, these characters were always clown characters who often lacked common sense and dignity. In close, while African Americans had more ways to express themselves, they were really only able to show what the whites wanted to see, demonstrating a lack of equality and therefore failing to achieve the American dream for this population.
The disparity between the perception of American and African American theater reflected itself in the world of art. African Americans, while some were artists prior to the Harlem Renaissance, had been unable to release their art to the public sphere. The Harlem Renaissance would mark the first time African Americans would finally be able to resemble their own culture using art of their creation. Artists like Aaron Douglas used paintings and panoramas to show the varying aspects of Negro culture in a way that was easily understood by both the public and African Americans themselves. While the cultural flourishing of the Harlem Renaissance was a renewal and a rebirth of the American dream for some, as a whole for all African Americans, it served as the first true manifestation of the elusive American dream. Thanks for watching.